Well, hello, I'm Jeff Baumgartner, a senior editor at Light Reading, and welcome to this edition of Signal Strength, a podcast from Light Reading focused on all things broadband, video, and streaming, and where we break down some of the headlines with an emphasis on the technologies and policies that are driving them all forward. And in this episode of Signal Strength, I caught up with Jay Rolls, the CTO of BSP, a company that does a lot of due diligence related to broadband M&A, and with a big focus on fiber system transactions. And as many of you know, or probably know, Jay has extensive experience in cable. That's where most of his career was spent. He's having served in CTO and tech exec roles at Charter Communications and Cox Communications. And for this episode, I caught up with Jay to discuss a new report he just published that digs into how and why fiber to the premises technologies have become an increasing strategic imperative for the cable guys. And though fiber has been like the go-to for the cable guys in greenfields and a lot of the government subsidized build-outs, Jay explains in the report that there's a lot of increased interest in driving fiber to the premises in some existing brownfield scenarios as well. So that's a little bit of a new component to all this. But has cable's thinking about fiber to the premises reached like a tipping point? Well, it's kind of a complicated question that spans a lot of areas, not just the core technology, but also the operational and the capital costs, the return on investment, and some of the long-term value. So there's also some intercompany politics that are part of that discussion as well. So we covered a lot of ground. So let's get to it. Well, hello, Jay. Good to see you. Thanks for joining the podcast. Glad to have you on again. I think it's been a long time.
Good to see you again too, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the potential future of the access network in a way, with a focus on the cable guys, a group that so well, given your vast CTO level experience with operators like Cox and Charter Communications, and also all the work that you did with the Cable Labs folks, and their work with DOCSIS and other industry specific specifications. So in that vein, today we're going to talk about what I thought was a pretty interesting report you put out that takes kind of this multifaceted approach into why fiber to the premises has become a strategic imperative, for cable operators. And, when I was looking at the report, which by the way was sponsored by Nokia, which is right in the middle of all the PON technology, is that, cable operators are evaluating whether DOCSIS 4.0 upgrades will be sufficient, or, whether it's, high time for some of them to pivot towards fiber. But before we kind of dig into all that, Jay, maybe just give us like a quick overview, of the work that you're doing at BSP, which we used to know as Broadband Success Partners. But I know you're doing a lot of due diligence, particularly around the M&A side, and I suspect you're going to be pretty busy at the upcoming Metro Connect event. I mean, that's coming up, I think, in just a few days
Monday,
from where we're talking.
Monday. Yeah. We have no less than 46 meetings. It's going to be
46. Okay. And that's in one day?
That's in 2.5 days. So,
Okay.
I want to thank Nokia for sponsoring this. I think Nokia had the idea to approach us sort of a little bit what you touched on, which is a lot of us at BSP have long careers in cable, but then the last 5 years, because of this M&A work that we do, we're mostly working in fiber, right? And so I've definitely learned a lot more about fiber than I knew, when I exited Charter as CTO. So, and so I think that what we do at BSP, to answer that one question, is there's a lot of M&A, mostly fiber, but some is fixed wireless, some is cable, some is we worked on a a telco the other month that went back to the 1890s, right? So, but fiber is getting the bulk of the focus these days, and so when these deals are done, we get brought in to sort of as the technical advisors. As I always say, we sort of pop the hood of the engine and see, like, is this thing built right, and are they paying the right amounts for construction, and the architecture, is that right? And it's just sort of a soup to nuts things, everything technical on the network, and a little bit of operations side of how these companies are running.
Yeah, and real quick on Metro Connect, so you have a bunch of meetings, and it's kind of the I don't know, I kind of hear it called like kind of a money show, right? So what are your expectations at this year's event? I mean, you have a ton of meetings, but is it because there's still a lot of M&A activity? I mean, you said I know there's not a lot of cable deals, but we just saw a deal with Armstrong, buying, MS, TV. Yep.
It does. I mean, I think it's an origin story. I've only been going for 3 years, I think. Yeah. I think its origin story was mainly really an operator kind of an event, but for whatever reason, it has morphed and now is also an investor event. And so our clients are predominantly private equity and infrastructure funds, and most of our meetings are with those kind of clients because those are the folks that are bringing us on, hiring us to do this work. So, but it is an interesting sort of intersection of operators and investors, and so it's a nice combination. Particularly for us, it's the most important conference of the entire year for us.
Okay, well, good. Well, let's talk a little bit about the report that you put out, and it goes into a lot of detail about why more cable operators are maybe shifting their thinking towards fiber. And I want to go into some of the specifics around the why, including elements like CapEx and OpEx and the competition that's out there. But, as you kind of look at it, as you kind of put it all together, what do you think is the biggest takeaway or, a couple of takeaways that kind of came out of
on the paper? Yeah, I think there are two key areas of this paper. One is it's this sort of sum of the parts view into this topic. And, a funny little story back in 2014, maybe, when I was CTO at Charter, and then Cox was going out, and at one point Cox was really aggressive. They were going to start doing fiber overbuilds. And so I remember making calls to my old colleagues.
I remember those days. Yeah.
And I remember calling them up and going, okay, you guys have some experience now. What's the skinny? Like, what's the savings on power? And basically asked them a lot of engineering questions. And I realized quickly that there's not a quick ROI on that fiber. And to be clear, I was looking at it just through a pure technical lens at the time. But there, over a longer horizon, there's certainly an ROI, but beyond sort of what some people can stomach. And so I think flash forward, and now some of those metrics have changed, but what the paper talks about, which I feel is important, is it looks across a whole variety of areas, not just the engineering and technical that I mentioned earlier. It looks at the operational and OpEx advantages. It looks at the sort of capital and asset value of the enterprise kind of viewpoint, as the competitive and marketing position, which is, there's plenty of those aspects that are not necessarily technical. And then, and even customer experience, right? And so as
more of a holistic view.
So it's really about a holistic view.
Yeah.
And so that's one part of the paper. And then the other part of the paper, which I've never seen written about, so I thought it was an interesting thing to dive in, which is, and it applies more to sort of medium and smaller size operators, but is this CFO CTO dynamic, and you may have a CTO that's like, hey, I can see fiber, and I have reasons I want to go fiber, and the CFO is like, no, that is too much money, and it talks about, well, how would you talk to your CFO or your CEO, and how would you talk about it in a more holistic manner, and then vice versa. A CFO who might realize, wow, I'm looking at enterprise value, we may want to have an equity event someday. I got to convince
where fiber has kind of an advantage there, right? In terms of just the perception on that.
Exactly.
End. Yeah.
And I got to convince my crusty old CTO who's, stuck in the mud or, things like that. So I talk about how those conversations can happen.
Yeah. So. All right. Yeah. We'll get into that a little bit more. So let's talk a little bit about the, some of the trends, with the cable guys, right? And I know it kind of varies depending on the operator and the size of the operator, but the industry has obviously become a little more agnostic, at the access network layer. And I think it's been clear for quite a while that fiber to the prem PON is the right approach in any greenfield. That's kind of like an established fact. We see that in edge outs and the new builds and a lot of the government subsidized builds, right? It's like you're just going with fiber. But I think you point out that it's also, there's like this decision point with some operators when it comes to the brownfield scenarios, right? And that, but that's a little more complex. So in terms of, do you pull the trigger or not, with fiber in those brownfields? So I was wondering if you can expand on that a little bit, kind of given, and given your background, in cable and HFC technology, does that thinking come as a surprise, or is it more of an inevitability, I guess, since, when you talk to anybody, it's like, well, the end game is going to be fiber at some point.
Right. Well, I mean, I think to the greenfield comment you made, I think the results are in a network on every metric of network performance, speed, symmetry, scalability, latency, reliability. Fiber has the upper hand. Now, from a coax perspective, I think operators are dealing with the cards that they've been dealt, right? That's where they are. They have this network, and
it's a big network.
Yeah. And that's the hard, I think that's the hard part of this. And I also think I would start to differentiate large public operators, publicly traded, versus small and medium operators. I really see that dichotomy. And so, if you're a publicly traded stock, I don't need to talk about how that seems to reward short-term, thinking sometimes, and
so the reality.
Yeah, and so if you look at these upgrade cycles, and some of these cycles are going to look a bit modest compared to a fiber overhaul, right? But you need to take that longer view look, and you need to say, wow, but every time we do this, it's just you're adding up these pieces, and it's adding up over time. And the last thing you want to do is wind up someplace where you look back and go, oh, maybe 7 years ago we should have played this differently, given where we end up, right? And so there's that aspect, and then there's all these other aspects that I talked about earlier that are not just about the upgrade. They're about the reliability. They're about the OpEx savings, right? So some operators their cable infrastructure is upwards of $2.50 or $3 a home passed for that OpEx. For a lot, power is a large part of that for an HFC network. And
on like a what basis? Like a monthly basis, or
on a monthly basis. Okay. And so you start adding that up, and like over 5 years, you're getting close to $200 a home passed over 5 years, right? And so we have the DOCSIS 3.1 or 3.1 enhanced, I should say.
3.1 plus, I think is
3.1
where they
plus.
ended up.
I think everybody has sort of come in at this $100 mark, and then you have the 4.0, which I think I've seen everything from like $150 to $250. I mean, so these start adding up, and when you look at fiber on a brownfield, you're generally probably talking as low as $400 and upwards of, on sort of typical or maybe aging plant, $1,000 per home passed. And so that's sort of the math. I would say that from the work that we've done, it's kind of fascinating because every cable plant is different. And we've done some calculations on what it costs to do a fiber upgrade. And we see that range. We see that $600, $700 range. And you would think that it's just like, oh, if it's 750 plant, it's going to be more, or if it's this or that. But sometimes it's counterintuitive. I've seen 1 gig plant be more expensive to upgrade on a node plus 2 config than a 750 plant with a node plus 3 config. Very sort of counterintuitive to.
And why is that? Yeah, it's like, what is it about? Yeah, because you're right. I would think it would be less. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I think, we did a bottoms up model last year for the first time ever of estimating these costs. But, it's like one of these massive models. And so like, if you ask that question, well, why is that? And it's sort of like asking, why is AI giving me this answer?
I see. It's not a simple thing.
It's not a simple, no. So
yeah. And also the world's a lot different now than the 3.0 to 3.1 jump, right? Because that was like $8 or something.
16, I think, is what.
Yeah, I think depend on. I think like a larger operator, it was down there, but yeah, I mean it was a magnitude of difference compared to 3.1 to 4.0 because of all the additional work. You just had to do one change at each end. Now you're changing a lot of things in between.
You didn't touch the outside plant, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think it's really important on these fiber networks to understand that, because lots of operators are right now going through this GPON to XGS if they've been around a little while. And it's the same thing. You don't touch the outside plant. You just fire up a new frequency on the plant. You leave your GPON subscribers alone. If you have some high-end service that somebody wants who's a GPON customer, okay, you get them a new CPE, but you don't have to swap all the CPE out. A little bit like how cable upgrades have been. But this is sort of like this outside plant is like a 50-year investment without any need to touch the outside plant over those 50 years. And that is, of course, not the history of how cable has evolved. So
yeah. And I think on the brownfield side, we do see some outliers, right? Among like some of the larger operators. I think of Optimum, rebranded from Altice USA in the East. So, they're doing a lot of overbuild VMO2. In the UK, they have some like conduit advantages, I think, to make it a little more financially feasible. But again, you had mentioned, hey, when you get down to like the tier 2, tier 3 independent guys, there's maybe more migration activity there. And then on the top, and we talk about Comcast and Charter, they're focused very much on HFC upgrades in the legacy network. So, when you kind of look at all together, there's no one size fits all here. But, as you look over time, I don't know how you include Comcast and Charter in the equation, but how do you see, the cable market evolving over like the next 10 years? I mean, do you see a lot more of them just saying, hey, we're just going to bite the bullet and skip 4.0 and do fiber to the prem, or see how far 3.1 plus can take you and then make a decision?
Right. I think particularly so for the small and medium operators, you're going to see them be the highest index towards fiber. I think it's going to be more challenging for the large operators. It's interesting that you bring up Optimum because, we know that or we believe, and we have some good information on this, that they are not, oddly, not turning down their coax plant. And so they've built all this fiber, and now it's sort of the worst of both worlds, because now operationally they're running two networks in parallel. And I just find that a little puzzling. And
is that because they have to operate? Because they can't change out everybody they can't just rip it out, because they still have a lot of customers on that network. It's not like a full sale or fully fledged switch.
Right. But I think I don't think it's a technical issue. I think it's a customer disruption worry. And it's interesting. We worked with working on a deal with a cable operator, mid to small cable operator, and they were converting to fiber. And I was so impressed. They were very disciplined in how they were doing this. They were rolling out their fiber. Then they had a communication program with all the subscribers saying, "Hey, we're swapping you to fiber." They may even had some incentives to sweeten the pain of having to disrupt the person and swap their equipment, right? And then they would get down to the last day right before cut, and the messaging got more and more urgent. But of course, there's still a small subset of people that just will always ignore everything. And so on the day of cutover, they would have like these emergency crews prepped and ready to just, because the phone calls would come in going, "Hey, what happened? Why am I offline? I'm not connected anymore. We've converted fiber," and they'll just send a truck that day of cut. They're sort of prepared for those emergency calls.
Just have them ready to roll.
Yeah. Exactly. And so they're very disciplined about this. And I thought it was, if you're going to do this, that's the right way to do it. I felt so.
Yeah, just kind of have a crew ready to run out there and kind of put out the fires, before they spread. Okay.
Right. Now, for large operators who 10 years from now are still on HFC, I think they'll be in there competing in the marketplace, and they'll maybe suffer from two things. Their margin will be lower because their operational costs will be higher. So from a competitive standpoint to their competitor, and then their reliability and their ability to compete in a quality may suffer. Will suffer next to fiber, and they may just sort of put up with that as a sort of artifact of staying on HFC. So
yeah, and I think that's why we're also seeing a lot more investment in for those who are going to be with HFC for a long time. A lot more investment in like AI and other technologies that can help improve the reliability and performance because of the competition. Because the fiber is just inherently more so. It's like, okay, we're not just talking about speeds and feeds all the time, because I think that's where they can compete pretty well still. HFC for the needs of most people, but we are kind of continuing to see additional emphasis on that other side. And like,
let's be clear, those are coping mechanisms. Those are coping mechanisms. Like those are they're doing things you don't have to do if you have a fiber network. And look, I was part of this. It's just amazing what we did in the RF domain and all the versions of DOCSIS. And but you're slamming more and more into physics issues and other issues as time goes by, particularly because this plant is active plant. It has to have power. It has a lot more points of failure than a passive fiber network. I'm really struck as sort of a cable guy that was around for a long time, how simple these fiber networks are. And maybe one other important point, one thing that's really interesting about fiber networks is they tend to work or not work. If you have a failure mode, it more than often is just not working. It's sort of on or off. And in cable, there's lots of degrees of degradation that can really drive you crazy when you're trying to troubleshoot things that just don't seem to exist in fiber networks.
Yeah, because I don't know, does that have to do with like the different modulations and things like that? Like certain modems, are limited to a certain modulation versus others that can go higher.
No,
yeah, it's a little more complicated. Yeah, in terms of
there's ingress noise and interference, and there's a lot of things in RF domain that just don't exist in the optical domain. So
yeah, all right, yeah, interesting. And I guess maybe this would be like a challenge, for some on the cable side, right? Is there still kind of this quasi religious or political debate, outside of the other pieces, like performance and operations and costs, where it's like, well, hey, we invented this, we don't want to steer away from it. We want to continue to support it and advance it.
I mean, with anything, clearly, if it's your bread and butter, that's where your comfort zone is. Yeah. So there's always that danger that you're sort of letting entropy just carry you along. But if we talk about these different aspects of like capital and asset value versus versus OpEx versus network and technology and speeds and feeds versus customer sat. I mean, now you're talking about in a cable operator, you're talking about these are people in different departments, different areas of the business. And they may each one of them look at one sort of more narrow viewpoint, their area of expertise on this. And you're not getting necessarily a good holistic view across all these lines of business of why the additive effect may be something to look at a lot closer.
Yeah. And maybe some of that will change too, right? Because they are, the cable operators are doing a lot more PON build outs, with, greenfields and other, many times they're building. So they're becoming experts too. So I think they are probably learning quite a bit, so they have something internally comparative, compared to what somebody from the outside is saying. Yeah. So interesting. And then, you had mentioned earlier, we want to talk a little bit about the kind of the intercompany politics of fiber. And you kind of referred to it as the CTO, CFO divide, between, the engineering side, the economics of the business. And I guess how is that divide, kind of being bridged, or how do you think what needs to be done to help, bridge those two sides together? So, both are kind of on the same page and understanding the other's right. point of view on it. Yeah.
I think this is a problem that probably exists more at the small and medium size operator, a little bit less from the very large size operator. But I think, I go into this in the paper, but it's a little bit of like, you need to learn to speak the language of your peer, right? So if you're a CTO, you need to start posturing this in sort of terms that the CFO is going to understand, and vice versa. I mean, that it sounds very simplistic, but I do go into a little bit of detail of that in the paper of like, here's some ideas of how what kind of metrics would catch the CFO's ear, and vice versa. So,
yeah, because I think if you get into too much of a engineering discussion, I imagine there'd be a little bit of blurriness, But yeah, speak their language as well, to kind of bring it together. All right, and I think probably everyone would agree. Yeah, the future end game, will be fiber. Who knows when that'll be for the cable guys? We're talking, many. I mean, HFC is going to be around for a long time. DOCSIS is going to be around for a long time. But even with 4.0, DOCSIS 4.0 being in the early phases, we're already starting to hear about, what comes next, right? And I think last fall at Tech Expo, Phil McKinney, CEO of Cable Labs, got out there and introduced this specification in the works 4.0 optional annex, where you'd get 25 gig by going to 3 gigahertz in the plant. And then he mentioned, hey, we're exploring 50 gig by going to 6 gigahertz, right? And there's a lot of challenges there, right? From power and a lot of other aspects. And but do you have an opinion on that? I mean, does it make sense to continue to squeeze more out of HFC? And 4.0 is going to is going to be around for a long time. But does it make sense to move up in the spectrum, or do you just kind of go, okay, this is where it ends, and if we make a leap, it's going to be to fiber to the premises?
Well, look, I'm already was starting to get skeptical on 4.0, so you can imagine my answer on all this is, and
that's technology that exists. Yeah,
I remember when we were looking at 4.0, and I don't know if some of this has changed, but we were looking at like the 1.6 to 1.8 gigahertz part of 4.0. We were like, ooh, some of that looks like it could be kind of challenging to really like push that, really use the full 1.8 gigahertz. And so I think it starts to get kind of crazy. If you're talking about 3 or 6, you're looking at things like total composite power and tilt and all these. Just from a physics standpoint, I think it gets very, very challenging. Not to mention, you may to take advantage of some of that. You may have fiber to a rock's throw within the home. It's like, okay, well, just run the last couple hundred feet of fiber, right? Because you may have to have a minimum, I imagine, node plus 0 for some of that, and maybe even very small node plus 0 nodes. So I don't know. I'm a bit skeptical about that.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on it.
I was always a fan. I think this of doing I always thought the great big bang for the buck was the 1.2 gigahertz, the DAA, and mid or high split, and that is a pretty, that gets you a lot of capacity. And then maybe instead of like pushing hard on the 4.0, meaning going to 1.8, maybe you focus your energy on vacating the video, because that's one way to gain a lot of bandwidth. And there's operators are evolving pretty fast towards having at least a path to get that video off there. But it's,
that's a pretty good chunk, right? Because I think 400 megahertz, maybe, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yep.
And some operators are doing it. I think Mediacom, is a good example. I don't know if they've already done it, but I know that they're in the process of becoming IP only on the video side. Yeah. That's like another, I remember those questions like many years ago. It's like, hey, how long is QAM video going to be on the network? And everyone would look in the crystal, they couldn't really tell, but it's like, well, a long time, it was kind of and then you have a lot of DTAs and devices out there.
A lot of complications. Yep.
Yeah. It's like they're all, you got to switch all those out. There's millions, tens of millions of those. So you have to, it's like, that's a transition. You talked about trying to avoid customer disruption. That's one potential disruption if you're going to try to flip it over. But, there are some benefits to it. Yeah. You can get a lot of spectrum back. And, I think when I kind of take everything together, what you're talking about, it's like, well, hey, the DOCSIS 3.1, if you exhaust all the opportunity there, it gives you a lot of runway before you'd even have to decide what's next. And
it's important to understand that plus or enhanced piece is some of the 4.0 features pulled forward. So, but yeah.
Good point. Well, last thing, I just want to have a quick question about power, right? Because the HFC network is powered, but there are some advantages, to that, right? You can, I think of, the things that they're hanging off the network, like Wi-Fi access points and
Yep.
the potential for like edge compute and these other things that you can do with these advanced nodes. Does that advantage disappear in PON? I mean, how do you account, for that piece of it? Because there's a good reason to have that, but if you go to like this passive network, how do you continue to support, these other things, or do you kind of leave that in place,
Right.
and kind of overbuild it, maybe not, and try not to make it a parallel network so that you can do both, but they're operating, on the same
Right.
back plane or whatever. Yeah.
It could be an advantage for a cable operator that migrates to fiber, that they have that infrastructure there, that they may choose to leave in place not for the cable plant, but for these other purposes. But I think I've not seen anybody do that, but I think that's a straight ROI analysis that says, can that pay for itself, and does that make sense versus whatever their alternatives are? So,
and I think that just kind of feeds into like when you said, hey, in brownfields, there's it's a complex question, what to do. Yeah. Because there are all these things you need to think about. So,
yeah.
All right, great. Well, I think that's where we're going to leave it for today, Jay. Glad we had a chance to catch up, and thanks again for your insights and good hunting at Metro Connects. And I'll be interested in hearing some of your thoughts on that, and we'll definitely keep in touch.
Yeah, I hope people take a look at the paper. It's not that super long. I think 10 pages or something like that, and maybe there's some things people will benefit from.
All right. Great, Jay. Thanks.
Right.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me today.
Sure thing.